Hi everyone, in this video we will learn about Power Query. Power Query is an amazing feature of Microsoft Excel. It can help you clean messy data, automate your repetitive tasks, and save you a lot of time. If you already use Excel, then Power Query is a life changer. Over the next few minutes, we will learn how we can connect to external data, do some basic transformation and data shaping, and finally, how we can load the data into pivot table reports. Let's have a look at an example of what we will achieve by the end of this video. Here I have a file which has data for pizza sales from Jan to March 2015. I have order ID, pizza ID, quantity, date, and time of order. I do not have pizza name in this file. There are two other separate files which have the mapping of pizza ID to pizza names. And I want to see a summary pivot table which has the pizza name and sales by month like shown over here. A traditional approach would have been to use VLOOKUP formula to look up the pizza names into the data and then create a pivot table. But that's a manual approach and it will take a lot of time. We will see how we can automate this using Power Query and keep the entire workflow dynamic. By dynamic, I mean every time the new data becomes available, system will automatically update the pivot table. For example, here I have a pivot table that shows sales from the month of January to March. And inside the sales folder, I have saved a file that contains the source data for this pivot table. It's the same file which we saw earlier. Inside the same folder, I will save the file containing April to June sales data. Note that this file also does not have the pizza name. It's in the same structure as the Jan to March file. Now I will go back to my pivot table, right-click anywhere on it and refresh it, and you will see that pivot table will grab the data for April to June as well. Similarly, I will go back to my folder and now let's say I have the sales for July to September available. I will go back to my pivot table and refresh it, and that should do the job. First, let's create a simple pivot table via Power Query on this Q1 sales data or Jan to March data. I have saved this file in a folder called Pizza Sales. Also, the two mapping files, pizzas and pizza types, are saved here. Using Power Query, I will set up a pivot table in a separate Excel file and not inside any of these ones. Make sure to close these files, otherwise Power Query will not be able to connect to them. I will create a new Excel file in which the pivot table will live. I'm setting it up on my desktop. You can set it up anywhere you like. To create a pivot table from external data or to link my file to external data source in general, I can go to the Data tab and click on the Get Data option. Here you will see several choices regarding the file types from which you can import data. Since our data is in an Excel file, I will go with that. I will provide the location of the file, which I just saved. Next window which opens will show me the sheets we have inside the selected Excel file. We have only sheet 1 for now, so I will select that. Power Query will first give an overview of the data inside the sheet 1. This looks familiar. It's exactly what we saw a few minutes back when we had our source file open. At the bottom, I have two options. I can either load the data or transform it. For now, I don't see any need to change or transform the data, so I will go with the option to load. And when we click the load button, we have two more options, load and load to. If I click on load, it will just create a new simple table. Since I want to create a pivot table, I will go with the load to option and select create pivot table. I will drag the pizza ID into the rows area, the quantity field into the values area, and the date field into the columns area. And we have our pivot table ready. Let's check if our table is properly connected to the source data. I will go to my source data file and change the quantity of the Hawaiian pizza. I will close the file and save it. Now I will right-click anywhere on my pivot table and select the refresh button. Once I do this, the value for Hawaiian pizza should get updated. There we go. This means our connection is working. I will go back to my source file and undo the change we just did and then refresh the pivot table again. and it's working. So in this example, we covered two steps, connecting and loading the data. There is another step we can do in the middle, that is transformation. Let's have a look at that one. Assume I want to change the header names of my data. For example, instead of quantity, I want to call this field QTY or a short form. To do that, I will first go to the Data tab and select Queries and Connections. This will open a pane on the side showing queries in my current Excel workbook. For now, we have only one query. To edit or transform it, I will double-click on the query. This will open the Power Query editor. Here, I can do several different transformations. Before we do any transformation, let's have a brief overview of the Power Query editor interface. On the Home and Transform tab, we have various transformation options. For example, on the Home tab, we can add or remove the columns or rows, split columns, replace values, merge or append different queries, etc. On the Transform tab, we have more options related to transposing the data, pivoting or unpivoting the columns, or doing some statistical analysis on the data. Next, we have a tab for Add Column. With these options, we can add a new column based on a formula, for example. On the View tab, we have options to alter the view of the Power Query editor. A helpful feature here is the column quality. If you have a large data, it might be difficult to identify if there are any errors or empty rows in your data. If you check the column quality, it will show you the overall quality of your data in each column. On the left, we have Queries pane. This shows list of queries. For now, we have only one. On the right, we have Properties and Applied Steps. Under the Properties, you can change the name of your query. I will give it a name of Pizza Sales. Next, we have Applied Steps. This will show you a list of transformation steps we have done in our query. But we haven't transformed our data yet. So where are these steps coming from? Well, by default, Power Query applies some transformation steps that it deems appropriate. If we want, we can delete or change them as well. But let's first see what are these steps. The first step is the source. Let's click on it. To see what the Power Query is doing in this step, we can look at the formula bar. In this step, our query is connecting to the source file, which is saved at the location mentioned in the formula. The next step is navigation, where it is diving into sheet 1. The first row of our data has column headers, as we can see here. So in the following step, Power Query is promoting the first row as headers. And in the last step, it's changing the data type of each column by looking at the column profile. If we want, we can assign a different data type. Click on the icon next to the column name. This will show you different data types available. I'm happy with the data type Power Query assigned by default, so I'll leave it as it is. Now I want to assign new names to my column headers. I will double click on the column name and give it the name of my choice. As I change my column names, you will notice a new step called Rename Columns will be added. And in the formula bar, we can see column names before and after the change. This is the best thing about Power Query. It records each step we perform and repeats it for us every time we refresh the pivot table or the query, saving us a lot of time. Next, I will go to the Home tab and select Close and Load. The pivot table appears empty. Our pivot table had the quantity field in the values area. We renamed that field to a short form QTY. Therefore, I will need this new name in the values area. So I will drag it. And once I do that, our pivot table is back. Changing the column name is a very basic transformation. You can do unlimited things with Power Query when it comes to data shaping. Let's have a look at a more complicated example. Currently, I see sales by pizza ID. I want to see sales by pizza name. However, I do not have pizza name field in my dataset. So I have a CSV file which has a mapping of pizza ID to pizza type, and then another CSV file which has a mapping of pizza type to pizza name. In a traditional approach, we would have applied a VLOOKUP formula to get summary by pizza names in this situation. In Power Query, we can merge these three tables to get all the information in one place. Later, I will also show you why a Power Query approach is better than the traditional VLOOKUP approach. To start, let's first connect to the CSV file. I will go to the Data tab and this time select From Text CSV. I will give the location of the file. It appears that Power Query has not promoted my first row as headers. Therefore, I will go to Transform Data, and once I click Transform Data, it opens up the same Power Query editor window we just went through. I see that Power Query has applied the Change Type step immediately after the Source step. I will delete the Change Type step and select Use the first row as headers. Once I click, the top row will become the header and step will be recorded in the Applied Steps section. Now I will set up a connection to the other mapping file. I can go to the option for New Source and select Text CSV. We can see in the left pane I have 3 queries now. First is our main query that loads into the pivot table. The other 2 are mapping tables. We haven't loaded them yet. I will go to the Home tab and this time I will select Close and Load To. In the window that opens, I will select only Create Connection. The reason I'm doing this is that I do not need the mapping data in my workbook as separate tables. I'm connecting to this data so that I can merge it with my main pivot table. Once we do this, you will see in the Queries pane, first query is loaded as a pivot table. It will show you the number of rows, and for other 2 it will show loaded as connection only. So we have connected and loaded our mapping data. Next, let's merge these queries. I will double click on the pizza sales query to open the Power Query editor. On the Home tab, I will select Merge Queries. A new window will open where I need to provide the 2 tables I want to merge. The first one is the pizza sales table, which is our pivot table as well. And for the second one, I will select the pizzas table. Next, I need to provide the common field based on which Power Query will merge these 2 tables. The common field here is the pizza ID, so I will select that on both the tables. I will go with the left outer join, which means we will have all the rows from the first table and only the matching rows from the second table. This works in a similar way to VLOOKUP formula in Excel. Here at the bottom, we can also see that all the records are matching. Once I click on OK, you will see a new column will be added containing a table. Let's expand this table by clicking the Expand button next to the column name. It will ask us what columns from the second table we want to import in our first one. We already have pizza ID in our first table, so we do not need this again. Also, I do not want the original column name as a prefix, so I will uncheck it. Once I click on OK, we will have the records from the second table merged into our first one, just like we would have done with the VLOOKUP formula. I will repeat the same for the third mapping table. This time for the common field, I will select pizza type ID. While expanding the table, I will select name and category. We do not need the pizza type ID and ingredients for now. Also, I will assign a new name to the column header and call it pizza name. On the right, we can see some new steps are added. As we were merging our tables, Power Query recorded those steps. Let's click on the merged queries. Here we can see in the formula bar that the Power Query merged the current table, which is pizza sales, with the pizzas table based on the pizza ID field. If you want to tweak it later on, you can do it from the formula bar as well. I will close and load the queries. When we select Close and Load, all the queries will be loaded in the existing load settings, which means pizza sales will be loaded as pivot table and the mapping tables will stay as connection only. Once loaded, I will see new fields in the pivot table field list. I will drag the pizza ID out of the rows area and replace it with pizza name. And there we go, we have our desired output. Now let's understand why this approach is more powerful than the traditional VLOOKUP approach. I will go to the source file of my main pivot table, which is sales Jan to March Excel file. In this file, we currently have data only for Jan to March. I will add the data for April to June at the bottom. I will reformat the dates so we can see it clearly. And there we go. From this row onwards, we have the data for April to June. I will close and save this file. Now let's go back to our pivot table and refresh it. And check it out. Since all the steps were recorded, pivot table has been updated for the new months. Had we used the traditional VLOOKUP approach, we would need to update and extend the formulas to capture new data every time. So Power Query saves you a lot of time by automating the repetitive tasks. Let's take it one step further. In the last example, we saw that April to June data was just added to the bottom in the same file where we had the Jan to March data. Let's say that the new data becomes available in a separate file, like it is shown over here. And we want to set up the query such that it picks up data from each new file that becomes available in this folder. I will close this file and set up a new one for this purpose. I will go to the Data tab, Get Data, and this time instead of selecting Excel Workbook or Text CSV, I will go with Folder. I will select the folder inside which I'm planning to save all my files and click on Open. Then I will select Combine and Transform Data. All my files will have the sales data on Sheet 1. So I will select Sheet 1 and click on OK. You will notice Excel has added few helper queries. These queries have the code that combine data from different files. The sales query at the bottom is the resultant query that contains the combined data. I will load these queries as a connection for now. Later on, we can convert them into a pivot table. Next, I want to connect to the CSV mapping files like we did in previous example. I will double-click the sales query to open the Power Query editor. And then I will connect to both the CSV files. Next, I will merge these queries in the same way as we did in the first example. We will again load everything as a connection. Now I will convert the sales query to pivot table. Right-click on the sales query, select Load To, and select Pivot Table Report and put it on an existing worksheet. I will grab the pizza name into the rows area, quantity into values, date into columns. So we have data for Jan to June. I will go to my source folder where all the files are saved. And over here, I'll bring a new file which has the data for sales from July to September. I'll also just show you what's inside it. So I'll double click on it and open the file. So this is our sales July to September file. It has sales starting from July 1st going all the way down to September 30th. And now let's refresh our pivot table and see if it works. And check it out, the sales have been added automatically. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel.